Okay, finally. Good morning. Hemshechayim Beis. We're volume 2. We are on page. Where are we? Page 1197. Oh, the top of 1198. The top of page 1198. And the subject matter is Chelas Ava, from the verse Shiur Hashirim that we first were introduced to it on page 1195. Samchuni ba'shishes, sustain me because I am in a state of love sickness. My heart is aching to be connected with you. So the sustenance that the verse talks about is ashishus, the flasks of wine, and the scent of apples. Where it talks about the makif and the sevav kalamin and beyond sevav kalamin, that somewhat relieves or quenches the chelas ava, this love sickness. This is on page, what I just read, 1195. Now, all this is coming to explain the healing that Eliyahu Hanavi created, the healing of the Mizbeach HaHorus on page 1192. So healing indicates something is lacking. There's an illness. There's something that is sick or not complete. And the Eliyahu Hanavi story is coming in continuation of Havayu Elikim, of Yadaita Ayin v'Shavesa Levecha Havayu Elikim, which we explained at length, are the two types of yichud. One is the yichud of Havayin Elikim Dilatata, the divine within existence, the Eir HaGvul, Oretz Mitachas, coming to recognize that the godliness that's concealed within existence is recognizing the godliness within it and its connection to Havaya as a manifest in Elikim in the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra. So that's the divine in existence. And Shamayim Amal is Eir HaBligvul that receded after the Tzimtzum and was not accessible to us. And yet we find through Aveda, we come to also V'yadayta Ayin v'Shavesa Levecha Elikim Havaya de Le'ela, recognizing the Eir HaBligvul. And to come to that level requires going through challenges. As he said on page 1192, V'derech chaim techachas musar, that it comes through tshuva, not just the Havaya of Torah mitzvahs, but through miyasadas, through reprimanding and through affliction and through challenges. So that's when he went into Eliyahu Hanavi, who he is the healing, because Eliyahu Hanavi, Havaya Elikim twice, is going to be this both levels of Havaya Elikim that we just discussed, Shemayim and Malval Oretz Mitachas. So all that led into whole discussion. What happened there? The Mizbeach was defiled and destroyed by the idolaters, yeah. And Eliyahu Hanavi came to heal it. Vayirape es Mizbeach Hashem HaHorus. And that was what caused them to see the miracles. And that's when they said Havaya Elikim twice. So to explain that, the Rebbe Rashab went into Havaya Elikim twice because Mizbeach is Malchus. Mizbeach, Eish al Mizbeach is the yearning of Malchus. Eish Hei, Isha. Vel Ishech Chukosech. The Isha Malchus yearning and longing to connect the Eir HaGvul, the Eish Cheda, the dark fire, wanting to connect to the white fire, to the Bligvul. So that aching, that explained at length, that's what Malchus is, and that's why Samchuni ba'sheshes, as he said, that is the thirst of Malchus to connect to Sevav Kalamin, Eish Hei, connecting to Eish Yud, Isha connecting to Ish. And in this Maimer, he said, just as it is in Malchus, the same is in Avedus HaNefesh, B'nefesh HaAdam, needs to have also this thirst and this longing and aching, chelas ava in davening, and that's what we're middle of talking about, that aching. So he said the primary chelas ava comes when you see the thing you love, and you can't quite contain it because you see it, but you don't have it. When it comes to contemplating about it, so the contemplation is not quite as obvious. You're contemplating, and he said clearly that there is some tainuk from that. You get some pleasure from the contemplation of elikuz that's beyond. But when you see it, it creates a much deeper level of longing. So on one hand, you're closer to it because you're seeing it. You're not just hearing about it. You're not just thinking about it. But on the other hand, there's also a direct proportion to that. There's also a deeper longing and a deeper aching. Now, just for the record, not just, it's actually vital. I wanted to see the context of these memorim. So I went to look and I learned over Shabbos the memorim that are the basis of this idea, because there's a lot of things that need explanation. So let me just give you a summary of what is going on behind the scenes here. And I think it'll also help us understand the continuation of Ayin Beis here. So remember, this theme of Ayin Beis is interface. And the interface between radically opposite, diametric opposites, in this case, the godliness, God, and existence, is not an easy thing to bridge. Throughout Ayin Beis, he's been talking exactly how we bridge these two realities. In the language before the tzimtzum, after the tzimtzum, the infinite, the finite. So in the last Maimorim, we've been talking a lot about Das Elyon and Das Tacht, the perspective from above, the perspective from below. The godliness within existence, connecting with the godliness beyond existence. And in these Maimorim right now, we're talking about the avodah of it. So it comes quite natural that to bridge such opposites is not going to be an easy process. It's not just smooth. There has to be an element where we, the existence, on one hand, recognizes how alukus, and especially the highest levels of godliness, is so beyond us. At the same time, we want to make sure it doesn't annihilate us. Because remember, pre-tzimtzum energy on its own does not leave room for another space for any existence. The tzimtzum was necessary in order for us to exist, but the tzimtzum is not airtight. Its purpose is to allow us to grow and acclimate ourselves, be able to assimilate the higher levels of elikus in a way that we don't get annihilated. At the same time, we want elikus. We don't just want our comfort zone after the tzimtzum, where we're comfortable with, let's say, a godliness that fits very packaged well inside our beings. That's recognizing the godliness within us, which is also a nice level, but it's not an experience of experiencing divine in its purest forms. So how do you balance these two is a big process. So one of the aspects that we learned much earlier is that Rotzi and Shuv is a vital component here. In addition to obviously us appreciating and learning like a student that grows step by step, we learn more, we internalize it, then we grow further. Like he even used the example when he said about Koyina Shadaita de Rabbi on top of page 1194. That first we begin by relating to the godliness within us. Asar Maimoris Nivra Elam, Yehi Eir, Yehi Rakia. We make a bracha when God blesses us. Birchas Hanenin, Birchas Hamazon, all the different things that we do to recognize and to show gratitude and connect to the godliness within us. Then there comes the yearning to be able to connect to the godliness beyond us. So the very process of all of this is essentially an element of Ratzeh. Because if we don't yearn and we don't long, we're not going to connect to something greater than us. Who longs? Only someone that recognizes something beyond themselves and they want to be part of it. If you're too comfortable in your life, you're not going to have any longing. So the idea of Ratzeh is a critical component in the interface between Elikus and us, because you need to show up. You need to show up and say, I want this. If you don't want it, God cannot impose it on you. I mean, of course, he could impose it, but then it won't be a dira b'tachteinim. It won't be something we earned. It won't be something we have internalized. God's imposing, which of course defeats the whole purpose, which is to make a dir b'tachtenim in existence as we know it from on our terms. So it's a constant process of us opening ourselves up, which really he put much earlier. He said that the transformation of the tzimtzum on a microcosmic level is you simply somewhat taming and harnessing your animal soul, because your animal soul is a product of the tzimtzum because it conceals the divine of the divine soul. So on a personal level, the only way that changes is if you do something about it. If we leave things as they are, we do nothing, then the tzimtzum reigns supreme. God is concealed. Yes, perhaps you can have a glimpse here and there, and maybe even more, but it's all the godliness post-tzimtzum. But to be able to get to the highest levels, the more you learn, the more you know, the more you appreciate, the more you want, and you crave. Another word that was used, and you long. All the words, sama, ta'av, thirst, hunger, whatever word you want to use, whatever verb you want to use, it's all about the more you see, the more you recognize the not just the superiority, but the reality of the divine, and contrast it with the reality of existence, the more you want to be part of it. Like the flame that's seeking its source. So essentially, what we're learning now is exactly that process. Now, in its extreme form, it's called chaylas ava. Not just ava, not just you love it and you want it, but you actually become sick and you ache head to toe in your craving. That's the level we're talking about. Now, how will that level be relieved? How will that thirst be quenched? So generally, la'asad lave is when finally there'll be the healing of the chaylas ava of Golus. Because then Elokus will be revealed, it'll be internalized, and we will be at peace with that. But remember, at peace doesn't mean that you go into retirement. It just means that you're able to internalize and quench, but there'll always be a constant restlessness to seek more. So that never disappears. But the level of Chelas Ava we're talking about in Golus, that's one. Number two, today we do it through Torah and mitzvahs. So like when he said in the previous mimer, he said, Ba'asheshes and Ravduni b'tapuchim, cover me with the apples, which is to relieve the chelas, ki chelas ava on oni, is somewhat of a process of where we begin to somewhat quench some of that thirst, but it's not complete until asad love. Okay, so what we've been learning now, which is based on these maimorim, especially, and I'll tell you where the mimer is. The mimer begins with the Alter Rebbe and Tov Kuf Samach Gimel, which would be the equivalent of, what would be the equivalent of 18, no, not Samach Gimel, Ayin Gimel is 1812, 1813, 1793. Pesach, around Pesach time, the Alter Rebbe said this mimer called Samchuni Ba'asheshes. There's another version called Su Marim Einechem, which is, they're both interconnected. And that's where he connected the Chelas Ava to Riyah.
Two Ma'amorim, Samchuni Ba'asheshes.
They're two Ma'amorim, but the same mimer, but in one place it begins Samchuni Ba'asheshes, and one place it begins Su Marim Einechem. You can learn in Tovkuf Samach Gimel. So it could be he said it twice, and each time he began differently. That's probably most likely what happened. But in Chassidus, the Maimorim that follow, there's a Maimorim from each of the Rabbeim on those verses. The connection of Su Marim Einechem v'Re'u, the seeing, talks there much about how the Navi Yeshaya is helping the people see Elokus through existence. And that vision is what causes the Chelas Ava. That's essentially, well, that's a one key point there, but that's where he makes that connection. And there's a long discussions of how you see it in how you see Elokus, Su Marim Einechem Ru'u Mibara Ela, which part of that is cited here in Ayin Beis. But the next mimer I want to refer you to is a mimer said 30 years later by the Tzemach Tzedek. Pesach Tov Kuf Tzadigimel. So Sama Gimel, Ayin Gimel, Pei Gimel, Tzadi Gimel. 30 years later, Tzadi Gimel would be the year, what would be the year Tzadi Gimel, if Ayin Gimel, 30 years? 1793, 30, 1823. In 1823, the Tzemach Tzedek said the Maimer, and Ayin Beis is very much based on the Tzemach Tzedek's Maimer, which is based on the Alter Rebbe's Maimer. There's sources, if you really want to look it up, I can give you all the sources. There's a few places that it's discussed pretty much at length. The Tzemach Tzedek Maimer is a very long Maimer, and they're actually selections, entire paragraphs from Ayin Beis that are straight from the Tzemach Tzedek's Maimer. That's why that Maimer is so vital to understand. But the Rebbe Rashab doesn't cite everything. He only cites some of it, not all of the points.
It's
One of the things that
the Tzemach Tzedek.
Yeah.
Can you post that after the class, please?
You mean the actual place where it's printed?
The citation.
The years in the names of the Ma'amorim.
No, he's talking about the citation is not the years of my mom. The citation is a long citations. I can't post the whole thing.
No, Tov Kuf Samach Tzadi Gimel from the Tzemach Tzedek. It's a Maimer, right?
I'm talking to Yitzchak now. He asked for citation, not for source. The citations I'm saying to you is too long to post. It's entire sections.
I mean, I meant not just to quote it, but just the how I can find it. Like this mimer in this year, like how I can go find it. That's all I mean.
The name of the Maimer from Tzemach Tzedek.
Exactly.
Samchuni b'Sheshes Tavkuf Tzadi Gimel. It's printed in Eira Teira. I'll give it to you right now.
Okay.
It's printed in Eira Teira.
Eira Teira or Teira Oil?
I'm talking about the Tzemach Tzedek, Eira Teira. Teira is from the Alter Rebbe.
Oh.
Torah.
Eira Teira, Shir Hashirim. The bottom of page 211 till 229.
Thank you. What's the
18-page mimer.
do I need a year for that? I'm sorry if it's an ignorant question. Do I need a year?
You need what?
A year when this.
No, this is where it's printed.
Okay.
Eira Teira, Shir Hashirim, page 200. The year is Tov Kuf Tzadi Gimel. It's also printed in Eira Teira Pesach, Vayikra, the Maimorim of Pesach, volume 3 of Vayikra, if you're interested.
Thank you.
Okay.
Also called Samchuni Ba'Shishois in Vayikra.
Yeah, for the fourth time, yes.
No. In Vayikra also.
The same mimer, it's exactly the same mimer. Yeah. The Alter Rebbe's mimer, in Eira Teira, volume 3, Vayikra, it's printed on page 780. It's exactly the same mimer. The Alter Rebbe's mimer is Maimori Ad Murazok and Tov Kuf Samach Gimel. There's 2 volumes. You go to volume 1, Tov Kuf Samach Gimel. And if you want more, I can give you some more too. Sefer Achkir from the Tzemach Tzedek. There's a whole long mimer in Samchuni, as well as Sumar and Menachem, where it talks about the same themes. But the mimer of the Tzemach Tzedek that I just referred to, Shir Hashirim, is the main one to look at.
Thank
Now,
you very much.
there's a mimer from the Rebbe Rashab himself has also a Mashesh is Tofresh Samach. They say from Mamorim Tofresh Samach, which would be the year 1900. Right? Yeah. The year 1900, Tofresh Samach, the mimer is there. It's also, I think, is it a Pesach mem? I don't remember when it is. I think it's around Pesach. Now, a few things that I wanted to point out that I saw there. This thing with longing, when you see something, he gives the example in one of these Maimarim that the more somebody understands something, the more they long for it. The less you understand, the less you ache. Because you don't like it says, Yesiv Das, Yesiv Mechayiv. The more you know, the more pain there is. Knowledge is painful. When you don't know about something, you don't long for it. So in a sense, when there's riyah, meaning that you get closer to something by being able to visualize it, but at the same time, you don't have it, you don't own it, you don't contain it, and you can't grasp it, that creates a lot of longing, which can be very painful. type of longing. That's one thing that he doesn't say this specifically in Ayin Beis, but it's clear. Remember also, I should mention that the Maimer that we're learning is explained by the Frierdiker Rebbe in Tafresh Pei Beis. That I already referred to, I actually read from there. So that too, if you want to look that up, that also comes into this whole equation. The point is, when you look at all these Maimarim, it helps understand the context. But let me tell you where I'm leading to here. So what we learned so far on page 1197 was that through Riyah Belakus, the more you can see, the more you see something, the more longing there is. So the Tzemach Tzedek has a fascinating discussion there, the difference between seeing and hearing. And I just want to share briefly what he says, because the Rebbe Rashab is going to refer to it, but more bekitzer. Okay. What does he say there? He asks a question. It says, Ein adei mishmiya l'riyah. You can't compare seeing to hearing. You can't compare hearing to seeing. No, when you see something, it's always deeper than when you hear it. And yet, you see the opposite is also true. You cannot see fine, subtle things. In hearing, he says you could hear dvarim dakim, ma'oid. Like when you hear music or something like that. When you see something, you just see the object. You can try to understand some of its subtleties, but Riyah is much more about Gashmis, and Shmiyah seems to be much more about Ruchnis. So why do we say that Riyah is higher than Shmiyah? So, and you see the fact at the same time, when you see something, it's far more resonant, it's far more real to you than when you hear about it. Like that's why I spoke about Ein Eid Nasa Dayan. When you hear about something, you can always question, did it really happen? Did the guy tell me the right story? You know, a witness could be questioned. But if you saw it yourself, you say, I saw it. Seeing is believing. I saw it with my own eyes. Someone will say to you, did you understand what you saw? You say, no, I may not have understood it, but I saw it. So on one hand, sight has a far more hisamtus. On the other hand, hearing has far more certain element of refinement. The subtle, he says the words are, I'll just use the words of the Tzemach Tzedek. He says these words.
Simon, I'm sorry to interrupt. Please, I know it was asked before, but if you could write all of these sources in the WhatsApp, the names from Alter Rebbe and from the Tzemach.
You know what? Do me a favor. Since I'm in middle, and I said it already, you could always go back to the recording. Let me finish what I'm speaking about and ask these questions at the end, the technical questions. I just feel there's other people on the thing. I just don't want to keep going back. I'm middle of a sentence and a thought. Okay. Now, he says like this, and maybe to have a pen near you, so when I say it, just write it down so we don't have to repeat it 6 times. I'm not complaining, I'm just mentioning. Let's be practical here. So he says these words. That Chachma, remember, Riyah is also in Chachma, which is a higher level than Shemiyah, which is in Bina. So he says like this. That Shmiyah, Pulosa, Lahazin HaKeles VaDiburim Shein Ruchnim Ve'en Lem Chemer Gashmi. Uberiyah HaPula Gashmis Lahavin Nistak B'Dvarim Gashmim Dafke. Mashenkin B'Dvarim Ruchnim Kakel VaDibur Ein Nitfasim Ayidei Riyah. Basically, Riyah sees physical things. Shmiyah can also hear more subtle spiritual things. So he says, L'cheira, this reason because Shmiyah is daka b'yesem in Riyah, because Shmiyah is more subtle than seeing. That's why it grasps dvarim ruchnim. V'tzarich lahaven, and we have to understand, haloi hariyah gevei yesem in Shmiyah. Isn't seeing a higher level than Shmiyah. Chachma is higher than Bina. And we actually see that when you see something, there's more hispilus. You're more excited than when you hear about it. Because Shmiyah is more about how that you're comprehending it, you're understanding it, you're in your mind. Okay. So he answers two answers to this question. So before then he says, he finalized the question, says, Im kein lama b'mahusa mashmiya daki yeser litvis varim ruchni mashenkin beriya. So then why in the personality is listening, you can hear more subtle things than when you see things. So he answers two answers. That the truth is, the faculty of seeing and hearing are just two instruments that express two powers of the nefesh. That's what he says here. So the root of Riyah is on a far higher level than the root of listening. And that's why, because whatever is higher also manifests in the lower level. The Gavay B'Yesa comes down to lower levels. So that's why you cannot hear physical things. You could see physical things. So in a sense, that's exactly the quality of Riyah, because it's rooted so high. That's why it can see a Gashmizdika thing. Because how could a nefesh, which is spiritual, see something that's physical? The nefesh is a spiritual entity. So it seems like it should only be able to relate to spirituality. The fact that you can see something physical means that the faculty of Riyah is rooted higher than the faculty of Shmiyah, of listening. That's point number one. The second answer he gives, which I'm sure is interdependent, is like this. He says, is precisely because Shmiyah does not grasp the very essence of the thing, meaning seeing it like you do when you see, that's why it can reach further and appreciate spiritual stuff. And he gives the example, Chacham Adolf Minavi. A wise person has a quality that's better than a prophet. Why? Because a prophet, because he sees a level, he can only see that far. But since Shmiyah, you don't really see the very level itself. It's only like you hear about it, so you can hear things that are far more distant from you. So Shmiyah is able to, the Chacham can understand, for example, the world of Atzilus, and a Navi can only see the world of Bria. So which one is greater? So to hear about it and understand it, you can understand and hear things that are beyond you. But seeing means that your reality, you're like it's right in front of your eyes. So therefore, Riyah's quality is also the reason that you cannot see Ruchniyazdika things, because a Gashmiyazdika person only relates to Gashmiyazdika things. So Shmiyah has the Maila that you can appreciate and hear things that are beyond you. Riyah has the Maila that they're very real to you. So that's why when you hear something, you get excited to some extent. Riyah creates much greater excitement. But if you were able to only hear the levels of the divine, it wouldn't cause Chelas Ava. Chelas Ava is caused because you see it so closely, at the same time, you can't grasp it. So that frustration is so much deeper. That's essentially what he says. If you look in the Maimer, you'll see it more. So basically, the words he uses here is that there's Hasogas HaMahus and Hasogas HaMetzias. Riyah Shmiyah only gets Metzias, not Mahus. One second. Let me correct myself. Let me make sure I'm right here. Yeah. Riyah is Hasogas HaMahus and Shmiyah is Metzias. So Metzias, to know that God, for example, exists without knowing anything about it, why not? That you can go up to the highest levels because you know about it. It's not something that you're experiencing firsthand. So when it says, to the Eibishter says to Moshe Rabbeinu, Lo yireni odem v'chai, no person can see me and live. He didn't say no person can hear me and live. Of course you could hear me. You could hear my voice. You could contemplate about me. That's not a problem because you're seeing it from a distance. You're hearing it from a distance. Seeing me is the issue. That means you're right there in my presence, and then that's a difficulty, because seeing is a mohus thing, and shmi is a metzias thing. So Metzius, you could know about things that are far beyond us without it annihilating us. Ria, if you go too far, it will overwhelm and annihilate the person. That's essentially what he says. So there's a mile in each one. Sharia Sargas Mahus, Shukirav Gadol, right? And Shmi Eina Sargas Muzak al Derech Yediyas HaMetzius. There's an interesting line also here that I want to just read to you, where the Tzemach Tzedek says, very interesting line. He explains the difference between Muhusa and Metzius. I'm trying to find where it is. 1 second. Muhusa Metzius, where does he say it? It says a line that's a very strong line. I wanted to share it. 1 second. I can't find it now. So then he continues and says the following. Oh, you know what the line is here. Let me look in Sefer Achira. Here it's very clear. 1 second. Yeah, here it is. No, I don't find it either. Here, okay, 1 minute. 1 minute. Oh, here. Shemetzius hu pirish shemasik sheyesh. Metzius means that you comprehend that it exists. Umahuse nikra kishemasik mamish. And mahuse means when you actually appreciate, you literally understand. Not that you understand that it exists. So, for example, someone can tell you electricity exists or nuclear energy exists. So that's Metzius. You just know it exists, but you don't know what it's about. When you study it and you come to learn what it really made of, that's called Mahus. So bottom line, Ria is the experience of the thing itself, but that's exactly why you don't understand it. Because it's not, because it's the thing itself and it's not in your control, like he says here. But then he adds the following. What is an Avedus Hashem? The difference is Yichud Elah and Yichud Tata. Yichud Tata is like Su Marim Einechem. That when you see existence, you see the power of Ein Sof in it. Like we learned, Yesh Ayin, and the actual creation, existence created from nothing, has no immediate source that's in any way connected to it, meaning similar to it. And the second thing, he spoke about Tmidus Pu'ulasa, that it continuously is continuous, it doesn't weaken, and its function doesn't weaken as well. So that's also Koyach Ein Sof. So he says that is Yichud Tata. That's like Elikus, Eira Gvul, what we called Havayu Elikim, Aretz Mitachas, that in existence, you see the divine force. So what do you learn from that? He says, that is a level of Riyah. That's a level of Riyah because you're seeing it. Yichud Elah is when you contemplate on the essence spheres of Atzilus, that's the words he used, how they're bottled and completely nullified Legaba Atzmus, Legaba the emanator, or like we learned Eirab Ligvul. Eirab Ligvul we don't see with our eyes because you don't see it in existence. In existence, you can see the divine energy that is energizing and creating existence. Yichud Elah is contemplation, it's Shmiyah. So because of that, he says, it doesn't quite have the same effect. These are the words he uses. That the bittul is deeper in Atzilus. So it's bittul Mitzias, whereas Yichud Tata, it's only bittul Hayesh. That's what he says. Okay. Mashenke and Bitl. The im calls that we see on Uraim Shabizbonus biyechudetata tispol hanefesh harbe yeser meizbonus shalom biyechudela. That through the contemplation yechudetata, the nefesh is more excited and more stimulated than the contemplation of yechudela. And he says v'zeu metam hanal. That's due to the reason of the bebchinas habitl biyechudetata hu bchinas riyah. It's a level of Riyah. You see the actual, through the actual existence, you see the divine. We cannot imagine, envision that level of bittul. We only can hear about it. We know it exists. And we understand their nullification. But it's only like shmiya merachik, like listening to something from a distance, like listening to a story that's beyond us. So when we're told that the Eirei Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum is a certain thing, that's not Riyah, that's Shmiyah. When we see the divine through our lives, through existence, that's Riyah. L'chein, l'kach, hagam she'ez banu zu gevor yeser, even though this contemplation, like Chochem, Adaf, Menovi, it's on a higher level, because you're talking about higher levels, Atzilus and higher Yichudei law. But it's like the example of Shmiya Tefesis in Yonim Dakin Veruchni Yesem in Ariyah, which is like listening, which can grasp more subtle things. You're talking about higher subtle levels when you talk higher, but what it doesn't have, the excitement is far more when you see something than when you hear about it. That's what he says here. Now you see why this is so vital. We'll soon see how this is going to come into play in our discussion here of the Eir HaGvul and the Eir HaBli Gvul.
All this you were reading now from Sefer Chatira?
All this is from Eir HaTeira Shir HaShirim.
I need milk.
Okay. Now, let me go back to Ayin Beis now. In Ayin Beis, what we learned on page 1197 was at length a discussion. And it's interesting, there are distinctions from this Maimer and then the Maimer of the Alter Rebbe. Here he focuses so much on Yesh Ma'ayin and on Hasmodas and Ha'pu'ula of creation. That you see the Ein Sof in the creation itself and its perpetual sustenance, perpetual consistency. So then I want to just point out to you these words on page 1197, the line that begins, Kasher anuroyim mitzias yesh. Oh no, what's that? No, not that line. Anyway, the point is on this page 1197, he talks about all this, the seeing of the divine within existence, which in turn is going to cause the aching, because you see it, and that's what causes a person to really want it. The more you see, the more you long, the more you ache for it. Oh, so the last four lines of the page is almost word for word from Eir HaTeira, Shir HaShirim, and Pesach. I want to just show it to you. See the lines where he says, Valkain, fifth line from the bottom of 1197. So he says like this. The line begins, Kiyam Nitzchi. So he says, Valkain, and therefore, Kasher Einav Reya Sheyisav is called Dover Gashmi, whom Ein Seif Mamish, וכמוי כן נמצא בהם כוח אינסוף המקיים מסם מציוסם הפולוסם, ואחר כך ייימק ויזבנן עניין בחינס אינסוף. So this is straight from Eir HaTeira with a few shifts. As a matter of fact, you know what? I'll make it even easier. I'm going to right now take a picture of it. I'm posting a picture. What did you post here? What is this? The mimer of... Oh yeah, that's the mimer.
Vayikra.
Yeah, that's the mimer. That's the same mimer. I'm going to post.
Should
I'm just going to post the piece that's literally.
I? Okay.
Literally, it's the middle of the mimer. Don't mind, make it. Okay. You know, I'll make 2 posts. Oh, let's start again. And then one more. Okay, if you look at what I just posted, I'm going to show you how it's literally the same language.
So is this the same as Shiur Shiurim?
Yeah. Yes, it is
Okay.
exactly the same mimer as I mentioned earlier. Okay. So here, if you look, I'll show you the comparison. So he says these words. Right? So look, look at the bottom of the 2 pages I just posted. So he says, now look, the next words. He then delves deeper into it, and he contemplates. And here we go to the next page in Eira Teira, the second page I posted. Inyan b'chinas einsof says Inyan b'chinas einsof shekol ishtalshus ha'elamus. See, literally word for word. She'ein b'chinas ein ketz u'misper. And then the Rebbe Rashab adds u'behem madregas al yenus of gvoyis ma'id. He just adds that within that itself, there are high, very high levels. Kulam, this is where it continues like the Tzemach Tzedek. Kulam ein arechle. Here he says they love. Acha kulam yachad shavenetzle, to the point that all of them are equal in compared to God. Imasiya gashmis vafilim demim achaz gashmi k'may even v'cheres. Literally word for word. Goes now to the next page. He adds the word da'ak, that's not there in Eira Teira. But then he says, V'demim gashmi, k'may even v'cheres, hakol shavin lefanav. The Tzemach Tzedek says, El pirush ein arech. So what do you see? And you see here, and then the continuation. It continues the same language. The B'chinas ein sof mam. The Rebbe Rashab says, "V'harei ein of reish mitzvah v'ef shel hasig muhusei." Im kol zeh b'chinas mahav kol niver ma'ayin leyesh tamid b'chol eis u'b'chol rega. Right. Again, there are shifts of certain words which can be. We can analyze why the Rebbe Rashab added, but he's adding explanation. So v'harei ein of reish mitzvah yizbarach. Exactly the same words. The ef shel hasig muhusei. So the mitzias we see, but we can't appreciate its muhus. B'shum efen. Same words, b'shum efen. V'fa'afil ganed nu rak ziva ha'ara. V'nuna lofim yevlis, Amar Azal. So again, almost the same words, Amar Azal. Al tikra shames el shemes. Shagam b'chinas elef hashvi chad charuv, which I explained last class. All of that chayeshirak b'chinas shem ba'ara levad. The ilazeis yelibay deyeg bekirbay, and due to all of this, his heart is concerned and with internally. The yichla mamash. He mamash gets ill. He gets ill, sick. Mizeh. Mashakol yemei elam la yuchal lahasig mohuz b'chinas ein sof. He could see it, but he can't mohuz. Now you may ask, didn't we say before that Shmiya is Mitzias and Ria is mohuz? Well, here he's saying that when you say Riyaz Mahus, you're seeing the thing itself. That's what it means. But you're only appreciating the existence of it, and you don't appreciate what it really means, which is why it creates the Chelas Ava. Okay.
Mahus HaMetzias.
Here, by the way, it says Itay Imay. The Samach Tzedek writes Oisai. Metzias Mamish Oisai Imay. So I'm not sure which is correct. Maybe it's supposed to be pronounced Oisai here. I'm not sure.
Itoy Imoy.
But look at the Samach Tzedek is Oisai Imay. Anyway, Eiches Hashemayim Zartz Ani Molei Umahavai Dezel Kol Davar Gashmi Veruchni Yesh Ma'ayin V'chein Einei Adam Loitis Be'eno Shareis Mitzuse V'koles Lahasig Mahuse Ve'ein. Here it says Lahasig Mahuse Ve'ein Likel Yodi Lahasig. Okay, so you see, this last piece we learned is essentially a paragraph lifted straight from Eira Teira with some variations and explanations. That's what I wanted to point out. Now,
It switches around, me'ain liyesh, and then Tzemach Tzedek me'yesh la'ayin.
there are other changes as well that can be discussed, but that's what he says here. The next paragraph in the Eira Teira, the Rebbe Rashab does not quote. But he does quote the paragraph after. The paragraph after is on the next page, which I didn't copy, which I didn't photograph. He does quote, but clearly, to understand this, it's helpful to understand the Samach Tzedek, which is what I wanted to really express in this shiur. Okay. Now, this is where we're up to the end of this paragraph. Bottom line is, what causes this deep chelas ava, this aching in the neshama, due to its ru'u mibara eila? Does anybody have any questions? I'm happy to take any questions. No questions? Okay.
Yeah, I don't understand how we can use Ria at all with Elokus. I mean, the whole point is that you can't see my face. God's concealed in this world. We're not given an eye that can actually see God. We can try to understand that below what people would call nature. Even the Tamidas of the Kiyum and the Tamidas, most people would say, that's nature. It's not. You don't see godliness, pani v'pani. You don't see godly with your eyes. I thought the
First
whole
of
idea
all,
about.
1 second. Let's get rid of the word panim. Where do you see the word panim?
Okay, I'll take out.
We're not talking about God's face. We're not discussing God's face. We're talking about seeing godliness.
Okay, so seeing godliness with a thing. The whole of an aid can't be a witness. Eyewitness can't be an aid because he's not amtus to seeing something. Once you see something, you can't deny it. With godliness in the world, there's millions and billions of people that deny it. Meaning that it's not. You can't see it, and I don't even know how that can be explained. It's an understanding that we can see godliness within nature, which is what, to me, I don't see how you could use the term Ria Mamish here.
Well, this was discussed a few classes back. I brought up this question. Everybody weighed in. I'm happy to hear what others have to say. What it seemed the consensus was the way that, yes, of course, God created a world where you can deny divine energy altogether. And you see, as you just said, billions of people that deny it. So you could say two things, what I'll say, and I'd like to hear what others have to say. There clearly is the expression of Ru'u mi bara Eila in the Pasuk. So Chassidus is focusing, starting with the Alter Rebbe, on the word Ru'u. He could have easily said Vishimu, like Shema Yisrael. Later in the Maimed Samach Tzedek explains Shema Yisrael is because you're talking about Yechudei Law, where there you could only hear from a distance. You can't see Yechudei Law because it's beyond us. But Yechuda Tata, the pasuk does say V'ru'u. So how do we explain that? So you could say two things I would like to say. Number one is that from the point of view of the Rabbeim, when the pasuk says Bereshis bara l'kim zashamayim v'sa'aretz, it doesn't come to prove it. It's a given. It's a given that there's a God. That's not something that those that don't accept it, don't accept it. Those that do don't need proof. The proof that for them is enough that nothing creates itself and existence cannot have created itself. And as such, that's a given. So once you have a given that there's a God that drives existence, so then when you see certain things and you're not jaded and you're not coming from a place where prove to me God exists, you have that as a given. So then when you see that something exists, a yesh, and it's not, doesn't have any identifiable source, and it's a given that God creates, so that for them, when they see the yesh, you see yesh ma'ayin, you see koyach ha'ein sof that created, the creative power of creation. For them, it's as equal. When I say them, it could be also us, but they for sure, for them, it's as equal. When you see a book, you see the author. You don't need to believe there's an author. The book itself is ru'u. It's not shmi. It's not like, okay, I'll show you, here's a book. And now someone tells you a story. You know what? This book happened to be written by an author that my great-great-grandfather told me that he knew. No, you see a book, you see the author. You see a computer, you see an engineer. So you see existence, you see a piece of art, you see the artist. You don't just believe in it, you don't just understand it. As a matter of fact, you don't necessarily understand it. You just know it's there. That's one thing. The second point I would make is that when you look at a light bulb, you don't see electricity in the same way you see the light bulb. But for anyone that's a little intelligent knows that the electricity is not just also some idea. It's just electricity is invisible to the naked eye, but when light is coming out of the bulb, it, for all practical purposes, it's the package. It's the you could say the, you know, when you see like something invisible, when you're like invisible ink and you pour water and suddenly the invisible ink, the letters appear. The keli, which is the light bulb, it's just physical manifestation of electricity, which just doesn't take on the ability for a person to be able to see it physically. So for all practical purposes, I'm seeing electricity. I'm not just seeing a light bulb. In other words, you see the chayis within the thing that is giving it chayis. So when you see, for example, like he says here about creation, and then you see that the sun and the moon, everything in existence erodes, everything decays, and you see certain things that don't weaken at all. And by the way, this is explained more in the Maimarim of the Maimarim I quoted, Sefer Akira and others. Then you say, what's if I saw a stone flying, and you see the stone doesn't stop flying, a stone right now, you look out the window, and a stone is flying by the window. You look, and it never drops. Why is it not dropping? You know, a human being only has that much strength. So the stone can fly 100 feet, 1,000 feet, I don't know, whatever. So you say to yourself, what's causing it to fly? You have to say there's something there. Now you could say maybe they built a motor in it. Maybe it's like an airplane, it has fuel. Or maybe, so bottom line is when you see it, you right away see that there's a power that's causing it to continue to flow. Now I know scientists will say the world is decaying and the sun is going to ultimately die out. Well, this is how they see it. They choose to see it that way. Fine, people have b'charta, a person could choose that because we do live in a world where it's concealed enough for us to deny it. But for those that do not choose to deny it and choose to accept that there is a force, so when you see it, it's to do as obvious as the stones that there must be a koyach ha'ein sof that's causing the sun and the moon and all the celestial bodies, and for that matter, the very species of the human race not to die out because it wants it there. And as long as God's will is there, it's going to keep it in motion. So those are the few points I would make in why he's trying to say Riyah and not Shmiya alone and Hasogim.
But it's sort of a bina, it's sort of the whole thing. Forgive me for saying this, but it really sounds like, you know, the world can't be created by itself. Sounds like a very strong bina. It doesn't sound like a shmiya. I mean, a bina or shmiya. It doesn't sound like a riyah to me at all.
Well, this is asking. I'm trying to explain why he calls it riyah, because riyah means that you look at the thing, you see right away. Let me ask you something. If you saw a stone flying, doesn't stop flying, a stone that never flies on its own, what do you see? Not just what you believe or hear. The flying stone tells you there's a koyach there. So in a sense, you're seeing the koyach. You're not, let's put it this way, you're not seeing, as I said, you don't see the electricity, but for all practical purposes, you see it manifestation.
Can I ask a quick question?
Look,
Just
as I said, I'm opening it up. We learned it in the Maimer. I'm trying to explain it. So if you have better explanation, by all means, I'm open to hear any explanation.
So I have a
I
question.
actually,
which
when I
may-
daven, just want to ask Ray, there's a thing that says, yeah, I don't remember who said it. Maybe it's in the Rama, that you have to picture God right in front of you. And even though he doesn't have any form, but that's more of a Riyah for me than going through all the, it's such a beautiful world. Therefore, somebody made it, therefore, which is more of a shmiyah to me. I don't know, man. Even
He
though
doesn't say a beautiful world here. He doesn't even bring beauty here.
No,
He's talking about the sustenance of it and its existence.
So I want to ask, this may bridge these issues. Sorry for the pun. But when we say Ria, we're seeing Mitziuso. We're not seeing Hiviuso. In other words, when our capacity to see, we can't see Hasag, we can't see the nature of God, let's say. We can see that he exists. We, as human beings, our Ria captures a Mitzius, not Hius. Is that correct from what we're getting here? But Shmiya, we could perhaps hear Hiuso, but what we're seeing is his existence. And that's what you're saying. For example, things are driving the things that we see. Something's keeping these things alive, whatever it may be. So something's throwing a stone's flying through there, someone threw it. A plant is growing alive, something's keeping it alive. A light is on, some electricity is coming to it.
Or even
where's the
further,
electricity?
Think of a puppet and a puppeteer.
Is that correct? What I said, that the
No.
Re'iyah we're talking about here is we're when we say Re'u, we're looking for things where we see Mitziuso, and we're not going to capture Hius of the Eibishter or Bleak Wall, correct?
No.
Well, I wouldn't use the word. I'd use the words. Just read the words that we just read inside. He says like this, the top of page 1198. He says, "V'are'ein of royas mitziusei is baruch v'ef shelahasig mohusei b'shemefen." Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
That's what you're saying. That's what it says here.
That's what I'm saying.
Well, so it's
Yeah.
exactly these are the words in the Maimer.
Yeah, well, okay. I actually was looking elsewhere, and then you're proving it right with what's right there. So, okay. Yes,
This is
100%. I was trying to understand
Well,
how
it's like
you're
saying
connecting
Not
the
that
things
there's
you said earlier.
electricity in the light bulb, but you don't understand the personality of electricity. Even scientists have a problem understanding how honestly you can broadcast a vision from 10,000 miles away and see it exactly the same way instantaneously. The mahus of that is not so simple. Mitzias, we know, and you can manipulate it even, and they can create instruments and technologies and all kinds of appliances based on it. But there's a mitzias part, there's a mahus. Mitzias in general means you see it with your own eyes. It doesn't mean you understand it. Remember, Shmi is the opposite. You could understand it, but not see it with your own eyes. You understand it exists. You can understand things like that. That's why I read from the Shiur Torah, because Shmiya has the exact opposite effect. That's why Shmiya cannot cause will not cause so much ispilus, because it's not like seeing something so immediate. But in many ways, you can reach a lot further with Shmiya than you can with Riyah.
I still
Anyway,
it
I'm
mean that-
asking you all, look, we're learning the Maimer together. We're trying to understand the Rebbe Rashab. The questions are legitimate. I'm saying that. But we need here to put our minds together to figure out what means Riyah. My understanding at the end of the day is that this is not Shmi and remember by a Rebbe and by a true Chassid, God is a given. You have to keep that in mind. The fact that 8 billion people may not believe it doesn't change their reality. By them, God is a reality. The question is this reality experienced in a form of like hearing and understanding, or is it experienced in a form of witnessing and seeing it. So basically, the Re'umi Bara Ela, from their point of view, is that when you look at creation with the right set of eyes, you see Elokus, not just hear about it. That's the essence of what they're saying. Now, you could say we're not on that level. That's fine. I'm also not on that level. When the Rebbe said Mashiach is here, and all we have to do is open our eyes, and if we open our eyes, we'll see it. Did he mean what, you're going to see a human being on the street called Mashiach? No, he said when you look at the events in history, for example, the advancements in political freedoms, the advancements in technology, the humanitarian efforts of Dhaka, the fall of the Soviet Union, the different events that happened, and you connect the dots, you will see Geula emerging. So someone will say, you lived in the time of Purim. Let's take Purim as an example. Purim took around 9 years. From the time by Hibemei Melech Achashverosh. You don't mind if everybody can mute until you speak? Okay. So, you're living through 9 years. Achashverosh throws a party, gets angry at Vashti, chooses a new queen, happens to be Esther. Mordechai happens to overhear a conspiracy. Okay. The Achashverosh happens to have insomnia, can't sleep. They happen to read the book of the Talmuds that talk about how Mordechai saved Achashverosh's life. Haman happens to be the guy walking outside in the courtyard. He happens to then be chosen by the king to go honor Mordechai, etc., etc. If you lived during that time and you were one of the 8 billion people of this planet, then it was a lot less, obviously. A bunch of random events. Yeah, they happen to end up happening. Complete miracle, we call Purim. If you asked a person who is a maimon in God, he wouldn't say, I believe God did this. I see it. How could all these things have happened? To me, it's as clear as day. He said, I don't need that type of proof. My proof is one that's visual when I look at the events. So I would say that's, in this context, an example of Riyah, not Shmiya. So we need to find such examples. I mean, again, you could ask questions. The question is, how do we explain this? Not how do we not understand?
I don't know that. First of all, it's a great example. And it's interesting.
And you know what? One second, let me just say. And from a historical point of view, by the way, how do we know George Washington existed? Is that based on faith and Shmiya, or is there an element of Riyah? So say, okay, we could find his skull. It's buried somewhere. Fine, but maybe someone changed it. In other words, even in science, certain evidence, which they will call visual evidence of, let's say, the Big Bang, or visual evidence of the asteroid that destroyed the dinosaurs, they'll show you bands in the earth, in the ground, where things changed and something shifted, and different fossilization and different ages and so on. Now, for them, that's like Riyah. They don't say it as a matter of we speculate, because they see things, and from those things they extrapolate and conclude certain things. I'm not saying it's exactly the same example, but it's somewhat like that. Like, again, when I say, do you see the author of this book, Rebbe Rashab, or you don't see him? You only know that he existed. So some would say the book itself is a manifestation of the author. Anyway, go ahead.
Well, I wanted to say first, the Purim example is a great one for many reasons, but also because God's name is not mentioned in the Megillah. That's one thing. Then further, just separately, from my own perspective, and I'm no great chassid, and I don't know that anyone has to be at the highest level for this to have meaning and impact. So when you say, look, for example, into nature, into the creation, and you think all the things that are happening at one time, you can look at leaves, you can look at electricity, you can look at a stone being thrown, you can think about the smallest, creature in the ocean, and the cars driving on the road, and the babies being born, and think of everything happening all at the same time. And again, you take it as an assumption that God exists, and God is not just putting these things in place, but driving the highest, the energy, the life of that at every moment, all the things happening all the time. Think about what kind of an what do you call the head of an orchestra conductor can
Right.
keep all these things moving at the same time and give them highest. It blows the mind. Even just look at a tree. Sometimes I walk back from shul and I want to get my mind in the right place. I just look at a tree, look at all the leaves on the tree, and they say, or blades of grass. They say for every blade of grass there's a malach, right? I mean, think about the infinite expansiveness of this creation and everything that's alive, and that there's one conductor that's keeping all of these things happening at the same time. And if he decided that he didn't want it to happen, there would be everything would plop. Everything would plop. I mean, to me, I don't think you have to be such a great chassid to say, oh my gosh, that's something that I want to be I want to get closer to.
Well,
You are right,
know,
100%, Isaac. And
No, I mean-
even you explained that very right. And the Rebbe Rashab is saying it in one line. Kasher yisboinen heitei be'inyan ishavus yesh me'ayin tichle nafshe me'oider ein sof baruch hu. You have to have misboinen heitei. It's not coming, you just look and it's getting you. When Yitzchak, you described it now very exactly. You cannot deny it.
I have
It's in front of your eyes.
I have to disagree dramatically with both of you.
You
I mean-
put
Well,
it
that,
on-
I mean,
you know, in all due respect, I mean, I always listen to you guys. Sometimes, you know, you blow me away. This one, I think I happen to not see that at all. You know, he's boning deeply, as you just said, Rabbi Tagdal, is not Riyah. That's under Riyah is one glance. Shkira, that you should see it
I
immediately.
agree with you, Elias,
And-
100%.
And that's not what this is all. I agree you can see godliness in Chassidus, but that's after contemplation. It's not seeing with your eye. It's
The Rebbe Rashab
understanding.
is not talking about Chassidus. He's talking now is spring and you're going out and you see the big tree that the whole entire winter.
Rabbi Taitel, you know, this,
And now it's blossoming.
with all due respect, there were 8 billion people in the world, and unfortunately, increasingly, that more people are saying that you can look at a tree and not see God. It's not obvious. If I were to show a rock, one second. If I were to show a rock in front of 8 billion people, and I say, "Is this a rock?" I'd probably get 7.5 billion saying yes. Maybe there'd be some Meshuggahs that say no, but the vast majority would say yes, that's a rock.
Because of
So,
8 billion.
but if you were to say, ask 8
yes,
billion
that's
people, if they look at the world, do they see God in evidence with their eyes? They would say, I think the majority, and unfortunately, it's increasingly going that way, that more and more people are saying no. They don't agree. They don't see the godliness in it, especially in the Western world and in Europe and the United States. There's increasing numbers of people who don't see it.
Because they don't want to see it.
And, you know, and then also, you know, the whole idea of knowing that there's God in the world, does that come from Bereshit bara Elokim? No. Al pi halacha, it doesn't come from that. It comes from the fact that Anochi Hashem Elokecha asher tzitzi mi'eretz Mitzrayim, that we saw with our eyes Gulatz Mitzrayim. That's what the Rambam says. Yedias Hashem is based on that
That's what
concept.
Yiddishkeit is based on. That's not what
I know,
knowing Hashem
but
is based on.
I'm saying that what Rabbi Jacobson was saying, Bereshit bara Elokim, we take it for granted that there's an existence of God. I'm saying that the basis of Pi Halachim, one of the Taryag mitzvahs, is a physical eyewitness account, in which, by the way, the Rebbe always brings as the ultimate proof of God is not looking at the world and seeing godliness in a tree. 1 second, and then I'll finish. 1 second, and then you can take over. It's not that, as you said, Yitzhak, you look at a tree and you obviously see there's God.
You're treading now an area that you're absolutely incorrect. If you want to argue that the world doesn't see it, fine, we'll talk about that. But that's what you're now doing is quoting the Rebbe to contradict the Rebbe Rashab. That's not acceptable, because the Rebbe never said such a thing. And the Rebbe says exactly what the Rebbe Rashab says. Remember, the Pasuk says, V'ru'u mi bara Eila. It's not a chiddush of my Ayin Beis, V'ru'u. You're asking what it means, fine. But don't quote the Rebbe as saying that the fact is, what you consider knowing God, you say requires faith. Chassidus says that God exists is not a matter of faith, it's a matter of fact. Now, the fact that 8 billion people don't accept that doesn't change what Chassidus and Torah says, just for the record. So you're going with a different axiom. Your axiom is that God's existence is a matter of choice and faith. And from Torah and Chassidus, it's not a matter. Sevav Kalalman is a matter of faith, that God is beyond existence. And even that Chassidus comes to explain. So I think our axioms, if you're going with the axiom of the secular world, that proof to me God's existence, I agree with you. All this falls apart. But if you go with the axiom that God exists and is a given and we don't need to prove it because nothing can create itself, then in that itself, there are levels of Riyah and levels of Shmiyah. So I think we're dealing here with different axioms. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, but I think the whole idea is, well, the thing about the world, physical world, is that's the whole thing that Chassidus tries to explain, or a lot of it, is that Gashmius is something that you cannot see its source. It seems independent from its source.
What's that? You're telling me the Rebbe Rashab is not aware that what Chassidus says?
No, of course not. Chas v'sholom.
What do you say? That everything the Rebbe Rashab is basically contradicting what it says in Chassidus?
No, absolutely not. I'm trying to understand it.
No.
I understand. One second. I want to...
Hold on. Let's divide. Your question about when a human being on earth looks at the sun and the moon, they don't see godliness.
Yes.
That I was addressing. Now you're asking another question. What does it say in Chassidus that we don't see Ruchnius and Gashmius? The Alter Rebbe says in Shiur V'Amunah that God concealed his presence, and therefore, if a person could see the Koyach Ein Sof in existence, we would cease to exist. That's a different question. Let's not conflate the two. Let's ask one at a time, or else we're going to just have one major confusion here. Is that what you're asking now? No.
I'm trying to understand first of all, Chas v'sholom to think that the Rebbe I'm disagreeing anything with the Rebbe or the Rebbe Shab.
No, I know you're
like
not.
That.
No, my point is, but there's a big. One second. Why don't you have this question? In Shiur V'Amunah, he says that God concealed Koyach HaTzimtzum. He concealed his presence from Gashmis. That's why it could exist. Like the light inside the sun, he had to conceal it. Shemesh U'Magen. And if an eye could see, we would cease to be. And here he says we see godliness when we look at existence. Why don't you ask that question?
Because the way I've been understanding, I'm trying to understand the physical Riyah, that the Riyah that I'm relating to is the Riyah within Chassidus.
What's your answer to this question?
The answer to this answer would be, as I'm struggling to understand how Riyah, literally on a mamish level of seeing, versus the Riyah that I have come to always understand, that we see godliness through the eye of the mind. By learning Chassidus, Torah reveals to us we can see godliness with the mind's eye.
Let me ask you something.
Not with our physical eye. That's the point.
You said 8 billion people about a stone. 8 billion people on this earth would be asked if they're subatomic particles. What would they say?
They would say they've never saw one in their life. So they would say I'm relying on a scientist.
And did any scientist ever see it?
I think so, yeah.
No, you can't see an atom. It's too small. Nobody's seen an atom. They see its effects. They see its effects. But they will talk about it just like they see it. Check it out. Look it up. You can't see an atom. You can't see subatomic particles because they're too small for the naked eye. And even a microscope, they've not created anything that can see anything that small. Yet they talk about it not that they understand. They talk about it as something that's a reality, as if you see it. It's just too small to see. So you see it from its effects.
Thank you very much.
But they can,
hold on. One second. No, you asked a question and you want to ask. I think I gave enough answers, but let me give you another one. If you see on your table right now, a piece of metal moving on its own, it's just moving. Mm-hmm. What are you going to conclude? That there must be some force that's making it move. Then someone points out to you, there's a magnet that's so strong behind the wall that's causing it to move. So what he's saying here, the Rebbe Rashab, that when you see the magnet, when you see the moving metal, you're like seeing the magnet, even though the magnet may be behind the wall, but it's strong enough like seeing it because you see its effect.
Okay, that I understand. But that's not seeing, to me, that seems to be different than seeing the godliness itself, rather
I
than
don't know
the
what you
effect
mean
of
by
godliness.
seeing godliness itself. Maybe this is called seeing godliness.
Okay, so
But
that's
since when
different.
does God have to
If that's
look
what
like-
you're saying, if that's what this
What's that?
mimer is
Since
saying,
what's that?
then I
Where did
understand
what's
it.
that? What's that? Who decided that God has to look like something? Maybe God looks like the Ein Sof that he manifests in. That's what you see.
Thank you.
See,
What,
first of all, he doesn't say here, I said to you in the beginning, he doesn't say here you see Atzmus. He doesn't say you see God's face. He says you see Koyach HaEin Sof with Riyah. Let's read the pasuk. Su'u Morem Einechem. Raise your eyes to heaven. V'ru'u, and see what? Me bara Eila. Who created all of this? He doesn't say you see God's essence. He doesn't even say you see God. He says who created all of this? You see the creative force, the creator in the creation.
You don't see the mahus, you see the metzius.
Yes, exactly. And you
Exactly.
don't even.
I don't see the Metzius. I see a Metzius of a tree, of a planet, of a moon, and a star. I don't see the
Okay,
Metzius
so
of godliness.
maybe you have to get. Maybe the Rebbe Rashab is trying to train us to look with the eyes at what seeing means is like seeing the magnet that's causing the metal to move. It's just like seeing subatomic particles because you see their impact, even if you don't like seeing a. You can't see a black hole, but you see its effect on all the bodies around it. So maybe it's a
Eliezer,
definition of
I have
seeing
a
that
question
needs to be.
for you.
Maybe we have to expand our definition of what means seeing.
So if that's what you mean by seeing, well, I can accept
Not what
that.
I mean, what the Rebbe Rashab says.
That's fine.
Rabbi
Eliezer,
Jacobson, you said, I think yesterday, last Friday, that Chachma is Re'iyah and Bina is understanding. Maybe
Yeah. I said it today also. Yeah.
So I'm saying maybe Re'iyah means something that's revealed to you, and Shmiya is something that you understand on your own.
I don't know.
Eliezer, you seem like Eliezer. You seem very scientific. I don't know what you do for a living, but you sound more like an engineer. So let's take Lahavdil. Let's take whatever the secular philosophy. Maybe it was Erasmus. How they talk about a prime mover. How do they have their own ways of proving the existence of God? And it's quite logical. And they talk about a prime mover. Something started the creation moving. Okay, and it's had to start somewhere. And when you think about the logic of that, you wind up with a prime mover, which is God. Okay, it's a much more simplistic explanation of a proof of God's existence, but that's my point. It's a simple explanation. Now, if you take that simple explanation and you take it downstream, whatever 13.8 billion years, and you see the things are still moving. The causality is in continuance. That's essentially what the Rabbi Rashab say. You can see this causation, this progression of the prime movement everywhere. So it's quite logical. When you look and you see things in existence, there is a power that is causing them to be in existence. That's how I see it, and that's a very logical explanation. I mean, if you want to talk about seeing God through the mind's eye, now I'm giving you through the mind's eye, which is logic. And I just said to you how you can see both through your eyes and through the mind's eye what it means to see God's existence.
Well, if you use the term logic, that is clearly Shmiya, right? That's hisbonenus. That's understanding. It's not seeing. It's understanding.
Let me throw something else into the.
All right.
Let me throw something else into the equation. Something I've been thinking about a lot. When you learn the Maimorim, Sumarim and Echem, I mentioned, there's a good 5 Maimorim, 6 Maimorim about it. He's very strong on this point that when you look at existence, you see godliness. Now, I think if you asked my feeling on it, being that I'm also a product and I been also, let's call it polluted by the Enlightenment in the 17th and 18th century, I think they've had an active effort that had a lot of impact on all of us, including me, to change how we look at reality. By them, they so undermined the idea of God being a given that they essentially convinced us that the things that were such given facts are not. And they tried to actively replace God with their own explanations. But you know something? When you say the word seeing, who decides? What happens if you figure out, I show you that everything you see with your eyes is a sleight of hand. I'll go a step further. Let's say, like in the Matrix, it's a program that machines created that you should think you exist, but all you are is a digital version of some machine's programming. Or as one philosopher put it, maybe everything is an illusion, and including your logic is an illusion, and every proof you have. Can you prove to me otherwise? You could say, because I see it, that's why it's real. I don't even know what that means. I used to think about this a lot. Just because I see something, first of all, look at great magicians. They make you see things that you think impossible. And it's a complete sleight of hand, and there's a whole trick behind it. Secondly, on a global scale, I don't know if since when are my eyes the final say about things? So maybe we have to review from the root. What does seeing mean? And what does listening mean? And what does understanding mean? And what does faith mean? So maybe this is, because I see from this conversation, I could also, as a skeptic, present the whole case. Look, proving God, what do you mean? Millions and billions of people don't accept God. They don't care. That idea that they don't accept the proof, for example. I used to always was very dismissive of the proof that just like a book can't write, it has to have an author. And art has to have an artist. And a musical composition has to have a composer. And a building has to have an architect. Why the universe is far more sophisticated, far more beautiful, far more musical, far more structured and designed. And yet it's so easy to say there's no designer, there's no creator, and it all is essentially natural selection and one big mutation that just happened to evolve over billions of years. I always used to think it's too simplistic of a proof. And if it's so obvious, why doesn't everybody accept it? But as I got older, I started thinking about it. I said, 1 second, what's the negation of the proof? So I spoke to many scientists. One scientist told me, it's not a proof, I'll tell you why. He says, because the building is not a product of 16 billion years of natural selection and mistakes, and finally a product that's sustained. He says, you know how many species died out? You know how many versions of the human race died out? This happens to be the final step of many mistakes. So if a building is built by an architect, it's not like one of trillions of buildings and one happened to stand. That was his answer to me. So I said to him, yeah, but at the end of the day, something did survive that works perfectly. A healthy human being that breathes on Earth, and there's no other environment in the solar systems that anyone has discovered yet that's conducive to life. So there's a certain concerted effort to dismiss what would seem obvious. And this is what I came to my conclusion. The reason people reject the engineering argument of design that I just mentioned, you know why? Because they are subjective. They're subjective because you know what? What difference does it make to me there's an architect of this building? If I don't have to pay him royalties, who cares? And there's an author of the book. But because if God exists, then suddenly we may have to be accountable because he created us. And since we have to be accountable, I'm very invested in having not to be answerable to anyone. So I've said this to scientists and they laugh at it. I said, so you're telling me I'm subjective because I'm religious and therefore I'm biased. You're biased too. You're invested in your conclusion that no God is very convenient. You can do whatever you want. And I'm glad there's an argument because I think we're dealing here with two paradigms, the secular one, and I'm not trying to dismiss what you said as being bad. It's a perspective, and I fully understand that perspective. And there's a perspective of Torah and Chassidus that looks at reality very differently. And I think that's where the clash is here. What defines reality? What is vision? What is Uriah? What is Shmiya? What is Amunah? Where does Seichel come in? And I think that's the discussion here, to be very straightforward. And I think the Ein Dover Eses Atzmei argument, like who put that first speck of dust before the Big Bang? You know, I just read there are 3 answers to that question in science. There's Stephen Hawking's answer that there was no time. There's another answer, I forgot already what it is, that it was all amorphous. And the third answer is we don't know. And they all say that's the ultimate answer. So fine, we could understand things yesh miyesh. But the ayin to the yesh, nobody has ever figured out. And it could very well be. So is that riyah? Was that faith? Was that shmiyah? Maybe that's riyah. Why is it less riyah? If I see a bunch of forces at work and all these forces are leading to something. But the first force, what's moving that first force, and I can't see it, but something is clearly moving it, maybe that's considered vision, if you really think about it, because who says what vision is? Anyway, I just wanted to throw in some more stuff for into the fray.
Rabbi Jacobson.
Wow, go ahead.
Okay, question for you. To your point, there have been many things that people see, different events that are taking place in front of their eyes, and then the camera shows something completely different, and those three people see three different realities, and they all saw it with their own eyes. To the point of the Torah, we come to this the story of Hagar and the well. The well was always there, but then it says that Hashem opened up her eyes, and then she saw the well. So sometimes could it be that we have to have the zechut and the keli to be able to see what reality is?
I think there's an element to that. Like when the Rebbe said the Geula is here, we have to open our eyes. I think there's an element of Riyah, not just Amunah and Shmiyah. Anyway, I think it's something that is worth this discussion. It's worth really reviewing properly. I would encourage you all to look at the Maimorim that talk about Sumar and Menechem and see how they use it. The Ru'u Mibara Eila is the key here, very key to the whole thing. Ru'u, not Shema Yisrael. Tzemach Tzedek, in this Maimer, he says clearly that Riyah is Shmiyah, and he says an expression actually that Shema Yisrael is vital. Here he says, he actually brings also a Gemara that I should mention. Ein ha-yetzer hara shelet ela b'masha ein of royos. The yetzer hara only has power in things it sees, not in things it doesn't see. What do you think about that one?
That's pretty powerful.
Is that from Saita?
That's from Saita Dav Ches. Yeah. If you're following Satan, the 49 days of the sphere is the 8th day. Okay, so where do we stand? I don't think we're having a debate. I think we're really seeing different ways, different perspectives on something, and what you define as reality and seeing reality. That's what I think is going on here. What do you think, Eliezer and Tzvi?
Well, I would say that when we reach the level of Elokus B'Pshitus in Olamos B'Hischachus, then I think we'll have that will be real Riyah. And that, I think that will come in a physical way when we have Me'Elokus from my basar Elokus, that will come to understand that. We'll see that. When the Geula, we'll actually see godliness in a way that will be accepted to everybody.
There it'll be, we learned that's already Riyah Samahus. He said clearly in Ayin Beis that we'll have Shuv and Riyah, that's a Pella that will come Lasad Love. Here in this Maimer, he wants to say that even now we have the Riyah, because I'll tell you furthermore, he's not only saying that we see godliness, he says it's making you ill. That's how much you see it. It's so powerful that it makes a person lovesick. That's really what he's saying.
I can only say that I feel that.
Eliezer,
yeah.
I want to suggest, this is why I went back before we even got into the big back and forth, that this is a huge distinction between Mitziuso and Hiuso. That what the Rebbe Rashab's here is saying, Re'u Mitziuso. And you're trying to say, I don't see God. And he's not saying Hiuso. He's not saying you can see his panim. He's saying you can see his existence. And maybe that doesn't help you, and it helps me a lot.
Well, first of all, Yitzhak, I'm a big believer in God. I've always believed in God. So I don't want to be painted here that I don't see godliness in the world. I see godliness every day of my life. So I'm a big believer in that. And quite honestly, Chassidus has opened my eyes to godliness in a way that I never believed possible in my life. So I see godliness.
So what's that? But you're using the word see. But you're using the word see.
Right. But I'm saying it's because that scene that I see is through what I refer to as the mind's eye, through Havana, through an understanding of Chassidus. Right now, godliness is in the book. It's in my morum. It's in say, what was that? Levi Yitzchak said we should see godliness in the world, and maybe put Yetzer Hara in the book. So
Right.
you know,
the Rebbe Rashab is saying clearly.
Seeing is not limited to physical sight.
You hear me? Look at the
What?
next line. All of this is Re'iyas Einei Basar Mamish.
Okay, that even strengthens. Where is that? Which line is that?
Right,
The next line
after
on page 1198. Anyway, since it's already 12:30 almost.
By the way, I just want to end. I don't not end, but it's interesting, Rabbi Jacobson, because I just Googled it. You know, I shouldn't have been processing, but it says electron was filmed for the first time ever. That they do have a video of it, and it says here that's at physics.org, and they said that until recently they didn't have the equipment, the kalim, that the videos are able to catch an electron because it was too quick to see. But then they developed these tools and instruments that were able to now capture it. My point here is that I think similar to right now, we don't have the instruments to see godliness, but pshitas, but we will. I have the full faith.
No, you cannot change pshat here. That's your understanding. He's not saying that here.
I know.
Here, you could say you don't understand what he's saying, but he's not talking about elikus b'pshitus. He's talking here about elikus right now in Golus, in Elam Hazeh, where you see it be'enei basar through three things: the creation yesh ma'ayin, through the consistency, and through the functionality that is always going on. That's what he says here, just for the record.
Fine.
He's not talking about elikus b'pshitus.
Okay. So
anyway, fine. You found the electron. Why don't you look one step further? Tell me if you can find subatomic particles. You think you have to see everything? What about DNA? Has anyone seen DNA?
I think the in the what's it called in Switzerland where that thing is.
You don't understand my point. You have to see it to know it's there. Is that what you're saying? I mean,
well,
my point is that it's just as they see it. When they see its effect, it's just as if they see it. That's my point.
But the thing, for example, I like to use the example of Albert Einstein's famous theory of the light. He said he had postulated, I think it was 1905, but actually they thought it was a theory. They thought it was a sound theory, but they never knew it really was true until they they actually measured the sunlight in 1921 when they found there was a discrepancy in time that how when the sunlight hit the Earth, there was some type of eclipse, and they said now but I understand where Rabbi Jacobson. I'm battling with it.
I think the problem here, no, I think the last thing you said really, I think drives the point home. You think seeing is the key, has to be on my terms of what sight is. Unless I see it under a microscope, it's not called seeing. I will tell you that means nothing from a point of view of Chassidus, because you can fool someone to see things. There's sleight of hand. There are many ways to create illusions. So seeing, you're giving too much credence to the physical. You think elikus b'pshitus means that necessarily your physical eye? It means the reality will be as real as anything you call seeing.
If that's what you say.
It's not about, it's einei basar mean seeing something is about its reality. It's not about whether it's under a microscope or not. Okay. Maybe you'll never see chayes eliki under a microscope. Maybe no matter what instrument you'll create, you think they're going to create instruments to see godliness, and today we don't have the instruments? Well, it's going to be a different reality of what defines reality. Let me ask you something. What the neshama and the guf, right? You will say that you see the body, you don't see the soul. You know what Chassidus would say? I see the soul, and the body is just an external, superficial shell. It's the soul that's the human being. When you love somebody, you love your wife, you love your children, you love their physical body, or you love their personality that shines through that body. It's the package or the soul within it. Now, you'll say, I don't see the personality, I don't see the character, but I see it in their behavior. You'll never see the essential personality, but you see its mitzias. The person that you love is a certain type of human being. and God forbid, after Me'av Esrim Shana, we miss it, even though the body remains. Why don't you just say, hey, at least I have the body with me? Because the body is just a package. So what does vision mean? Seeing the physical package, or seeing the thing inside the physical package, which may not be purely seen under a microscope, but it's as real to me just as the packages.
If that's what the Rebbe Rashab means here, I mean, Rabbi Tagtel just said that it said Ria Mamish. He wanted to emphasize,
yeah, because that's what real vision is. Eine Basar, I see the person I love, not only their package, I see the whole being. Now, define what seeing means.
Rabbi,
if you say
where
that,
are we
then
holding in the mimer?
What?
Where are we holding in the mimer?
We're on top of page 1198. We didn't learn further. We're on top of 1198 at the end of the paragraph.
Vihine?
But yeah, we're up to Vihine.
Okay, thank you.
I just wanted to say, Rabbi Jacobson, if that's what the Rebbe Rashab means by Ria, then I have no problem with anything here. Then okay. I thought it was more physical Ria, Eine Basar.
Well, he does say, look on the line on page, he says Rias Eine Basar Mamish. That's what he calls it. I'm telling you, that's what Ria is. Ria, the real Ria, Eine Basar Mamish, is not just seeing something with just a superficial seeing. It's really seeing. That's what I'm suggesting.
Okay.
V'yechelem Mamish is becoming sick. That's the Rebbe said, the Rebbe Rashab. V'yechelem Mamish. It's all part of him, this seeing, that he's becoming sick.
Rabbi Eliezer, I just want to say real quickly, Chas v'shalom never would ever come to suggest that you don't have a strong faith in God or don't believe in God's existence. God forbid. I was coming at it from the things I said were to try and help you, not to be punny, see it the way the rest of us are seeing what's going on here, because it's sad to me if you can't get this idea of Re'iyah, that it's comforting and it strengthens Emunah, and I think the whole point of this part of this mimer is how can we get closer to the Eibishter by seeing it? You be cholis Abba, you have this love sickness. That's what's I think he's going to drive us to connect to the Eibishter better. So where I was coming from is not to, God forbid, to criticize you, but to help you see, if you will, what the rest of us are understanding here, because it's a helpful thing. And I think it's sad if this doesn't resonate with you, but please understand, and I'm saying publicly, that's why I could send you a text, but publicly, God forbid, you should know I never meant to suggest your lack of faith in any way, shape, or form.
Okay.
No, but I am getting out of this, I think what Eliezer and Svi as well briefly presenting is let's put it this way, a contrary perspective from how, let's say, a scientist would argue the point. That's why I'm going into what defines actual seeing something. What does seeing mean? I mean, I think it's a very good question. Most people will say seeing means I see this table, I don't see. Let's put it this way: I don't see the tree from which wood came to make this table. That's called seeing. Someone else may say, no, when I see the table made of wood, to me, it's like seeing the tree. So really it comes down to what fits into the scope of vision. What exactly does vision mean? Does vision literally just physical sight? Or as I said with the neshama and the guf, the person you love is a full package. It's a body and a soul. And they come together and you're seeing it all. Some of it you see in a way which you can literally physically touch. And some of it, perhaps you don't see the physical, but you see it as if it's physical, because it's so real to you. Anyway,
right.
Just throwing out.
Well,
I think what I'm saying is we must. That's at the end of the day. That's what we're discussing here. I don't think there's a fundamental difference. We're not talking about whether there is a God or no God. We're talking about how real is that God in our senses. Let's put it this way, including the sense of vision. Or is it only relegated in the sense of shmiya, listening, understanding, logic, and so on? Right. Clearly, he's coming to say it's more real than just hearing it and believing in it and understanding it. That's clearly what he's saying. To the point that it affects your very being.
No, I'm told that when the Rebbe looked into the eyes of any yid, he could see their neshama. He could understand who they are, where they were holding, what they were about. And to me, that's the ultimate seeing. And I had to ask Eliezer, do you believe the Rebbe looked into someone's eyes? He could see their soul. He could understand who they were. Do you think that's just a wives' tale or not true? And if you do believe it's true, then this goes to the Rabbi Jacobson's point. What is seeing? It's not just the light that meets your eyes. It's what's beyond the light.
No, but I'll tell you what Eliezer would answer. I want to speak for him. He'll say the Rebbe can do that. A Rebbe, but can we?
Yeah.
I mean, is that what you're going to say, Eliezer?
Absolutely. Exactly. I mean, this book is for all of us, not just for Nasi Hador. Somebody who's got a
no
neshama.
problem saying that the Alter Rebbe saw the Koyach HaPoel Benifel in the beam.
Right.
Or the Rebbe Rashab looks at the sun, he sees godly energy. We're not asking if the Rebbe can see that. That we know. The question is can we understand it in that way, in a way that we can relate to the vision of it? I would argue that because the Rebbe is writing it, it means that we have some capacity, and maybe it requires broadening our horizon in how we define seeing, I honestly, I give one more example before we conclude. I have to go. There's a lot of things to do. When you show, let me give a very different example. You show a business plan to two people, one who's a novice and one is a seriously veteran, hard-earned, experienced guy that's seen it all. And they both look at the same business plan. To a novice, it looks great, beautiful. It doesn't have to only be a business plan. It could be anything. They see a potential athlete. And the other guy, the experienced one, says, no, this thing is flawed. It will not work. Or they look at a person, they say, you think he's great? No. Now, was one based on faith and one based on intuition and one based on vision? No. He's seeing a different person. They're both looking at the same person. They're both looking at the same business plan. But one person sees things that the other will never see because of his experience. Whether it's the bird's eye vision, whether it's things that are not obvious to the naked eye, So when I say to you, show the same. I remember someone I know well had a pain in their back. They had a terrible pain in their arm. Went to all kinds of experts. Was it a nerve? Was it a muscle? What is this? Went to one expert that everybody recommended in Manhattan. The expert looked at this person in 5 seconds, said right away, it's a pin, it's what do they call it? Something in the spine. Now, one of the things was whatever it was, and they needed to operate, and it was resolved.
Yes.
What? A disc, what's it called? A
slip disc, probably.
A herniated disc. I don't know.
Pinch nerve or slip disc.
Now, I asked myself the question: they all saw the same person. They all probably did all their tests, but this is perhaps you say, you know what? A child will never understand the difference. 1 second, they all have good eyesight. They all have 20/20 vision. They're all medically trained. They all know the human body well. One person saw what others didn't see. So it could very well be the Rebbe Rashab is challenging us to take the vision that we're so used to and say, you know what? I want to teach you how to be an expert seer of things. And I'll show you how you could see things if you really apply yourself. Now, again, I agree with you. It's not automatic. You just see the sun in the morning and you say, oh, godly energy. It requires, he says clearly, it requires looking at it, but also contemplating on it. He does say that, but it's also looking. There's ru'u mibara ela. There's an element of vision here. In other words, the doctor that didn't see the patient can't just say from a distance. He did see, and he saw something that others didn't see. So I think that's the way I would try to direct this conversation.
Shkoya, thank you.
Sure, everyone.
But good.
So if you put the two together, Ru'u and Hava and Shmiya, then that's true. If you call that true vision, that's what I understand it in a much higher, better way, I think.
Well, look at the lines. Let's just conclude with the 5 lines at the bottom of page 1197. I'll just read it again. Valkain, kasher einav royes, when his eyes see, sheisavas kol dover gashmi u'me'ein seif mamish, u'kamoy kein nimse be'em keich ein seif ha'mekayim u'masmid mitziusim ha'pu'ulasam, their creation, and also their consistency. Va'achar kach, yaimek v'yizbeinen inyan b'chinas ein sof. So I think there's two things here. There's seeing, and then there's then thinking about Ein Sof, how everything is nullified. That will bring Chaylas Ava. But without the Yaimek V'Yizbayin, you won't come to Chaylas Ava, but you will come to a certain element of vision. So I need to correct myself. I think that the Yaimek V'Yizbayin is not on seeing it, it's on affecting you, on impacting you, because that's a whole other story. You can see godly energy, but it doesn't mean the godly energy within something. Yeah. No, when I see a stone flying, let's use a stone. Let's not use, I'm not going to talk about the sun and the moon. If I see a stone flying out my window, there's no question someone threw that stone or some wind is carrying it. It didn't just pick itself up to fly in the sky. And it will fall ultimately. If I see it continuing to fly, it means that there's an energy. I don't have to see the energy with my physical eyes. I see it through the moving stone is the moving energy. And I would call that Einei Basar Mamish. I would not call that a contemplation or definitely not faith or contemplation or Shmiya. I would call that Riyah. Would you call that Riyah?
Well, it could, as you said earlier, it could be a motor inside the well, but okay, I understand your point, but
he's calling that Riyah. He is calling that Riyah. I must say, he's calling that Riyah. You can't say
definitely,
that, by the way.
It's definitely Riyah, but this Shmiya acting on Riyah. That's always
that's the thing. That's the thing. Two of them together. Like the Rabbi just says in those 4 lines, he says when you die, he's bone.
What's that? So the stone is Riyah, but the energy that's making the stone, the flying stone, is that Riyah? The flying stone, not the stone. That the stone is in a state of movement. You're seeing that with your own eyes.
Yes.
So the stone is one thing. I agree with you. What the stone is made up of, you need more than just seeing the stone. But there's a flying stone. The state of movement is a real physical state.
Right.
And that
again,
that's
you don't know
of the stone.
Right. You see a flying stone, but you don't necessarily know the source of what's making it fly.
Who cares? That's Muhus. That's the Muhus. We're not talking about Muhus. We're talking about the existence of some energy there.
Okay.
He calls it divine energy. Anyway, let's stop here.
Okay.
Let's all think about it. Listen, when you go out to the street today or just look out the window, try to see it.
How
about that? We'll try to see it.
See you soon, everyone.
I see it every day after this class. I mean, I see it every day after this class.
1198, first paragraph, we did a good